Hey guys, today we're going to be creating a simple API with Typescript, React, and Redux. First things first, we need to bootstrap our project. We can do that by issuing npx create react app. I'll name mine simple API, template, Redux, Typescript. Make sure you type Redux Typescript, not Typescript Redux, as the other option will give you the wrong bootstrapped project, and I found it quite problematic with its ESLint configurations. So I'll let this run through, and when it's finished, I'll be right back with you guys. Okay, so now that that's finished, I'm going to clear my terminal and fire up actually first I'm going to cd into my simple API and the source folder, and then I'm going to open VS Code with just code dot. You can use any text editor you like. I prefer VS Code. So okay, we're in our source folder now. So let's clear out this basic project first. So app.css, app.test.tsx, logo SVG, service workers, and index CSS. We do not need them. Let's go into features. We don't need this counter feature. And the app, I want to clear out whatever is in here just so that we can think through it when we come back and remake it. And then this whole file here app.tsx, I'll just delete this as well. Index.tsx, let's remove just service workers because we'll need these other two things. And then remove at the end this service worker. Okay, so first things first, we want to make a new folder inside of features, and we're just going to name it data. Inside of the data folder, we're going to add three files. We're going to add data slice.ts. This is going to hold our reducer. We're going to add data API.ts. That's going to simulate kind of a database or fetch API request. And then we're going to also have data displayer.tsx. So this will actually display our data. So let's go into data slice. We're just going to say const data slice equals create slice. Let's import create slice from Redux.js toolkit. Okay, so we have our create slice function. Inside of this, we are going to specify four things. We're going to have a name, which I'll just put as data. We're going to have an initial state, which we'll define in a minute. We're going to have reducers, which will be empty. We don't have any reducers as of now. And then some extra reducers. But this will be an anonymous function that takes build and returns something that we will add in a minute. Okay, so first, what is create slice? Create slice basically is going to create a reducer for us. But unlike the other kind of create reducer APIs, this one allows us to directly mutate the state. When we create these reducers, we need them to be pure functions. So a pure function takes some input, calculates some values, and returns something. But the thing about a pure function is it does not mutate the global state at all. It does not mutate the objects that are passed in, right? So with create slice, we can actually mutate the state. And it uses a library on the inside called immer, so that when we mutate the state, it actually kind of creates its own local version and then returns that. So even though we're mutating the state inside of create slice, it's not actually mutating the global state. It's mutating Immer is doing some sort of logic behind the scenes so that we're not mutating the global state. Hopefully that makes sense. But first we're gonna add this export interface data state. We're gonna have loading is a Boolean and data for now we'll put as any. So this will be our type for our initial state. So we'll add this type right here, and then we'll just add some initial values. Loading will be false, and data, we'll just put an empty array. Okay, cool. So we have our initial state defined. Oops, let me fix this. Okay, cool. So when we first create this slice, it's going to have this initial state passed in rather than undefined. Okay, so now let's add our kind of fake API. So inside of here, we're going to export a few types. We're going to export a type called instance data, and we'll set this equal to an object with a header of type string and a length of type number. And then we're going to export another type. This will be data instance. This will have a header field that is a string and a data field that is an array of these instance datas. Let me add this space. I just think that looks better. And then we're going to export our function. We'll just name this simulate fetch, like the simulate fetch API. So you could actually use the fetch API here, but this is just an example. I don't really want to, I could show you guys how to do that if you want, but for now we're just going to use this kind of simulate function. So it's going to return a promise that has a function of resolve, and the type of this is going to be result, and we're just going to say array of data instance. And this will map to void. Okay, cool. So we don't have any reject because I don't plan on this function ever rejecting. So inside of this function, we're gonna have a set timeout, and we're gonna have that execute after 5,000 milliseconds or 5 seconds. And then we're just gonna resolve with, oops, let's put that in here. Our result, which we will define now. So we'll say const result is an array of data instance, and we'll set this equal to our array. Add a few objects in here. Okay. All right, so these objects from data instance right here, you see that they need to have a header that's a string and data, which is going to be an array of instance data. So let's specify that. For the header, we'll just use a date. So we'll say new date dot to, oops, need to add that, dot to ISO string. And then we'll have our data property, which will make an array of these instant datas. So the instant data is an object with a header that is a string. So we can add header and length is a number. So for the header, let's just use name. So we'll say Billy, and the length we'll put 1. So these are arbitrary fields. You could maybe make this company and the length field be maybe their earnings for a quarter, but all that matters is that we have some strings and the length field is a number. So we'll add 3 of those. Let's change the names. Let's maybe do John, give John 10, and Emily, and we'll give Emily 15. Okay, so let's copy this and mix up the data a little bit just so that we have some variety. So we'll make the length for Billy be 9, the length for John to be 18, and the length for Emily to be 12. And we'll just keep on changing this, just add some variety. So, okay, cool. So we have our basic simulate fetch API finished. It's basically just returning a promise that will resolve after 5 seconds and return that data. So now we're going to go back to our data slice, and we're going to make our function that will be interacting with our reducer. So we're just going to export const fetch data async, and we'll make this create async thunk. And inside of create async thunk, we put a prefix, which we can just say will be data / fetch data. And then we add a payload creator, which in our case is an asynchronous function that will be returning a promise to an array of data instance. And inside of here, oops, let me fix this. Inside of here, we're going to define our response to be equal to await simulate fetch API, and we're just going to return our response. So now we have this fetch data async thunk, which if you want to learn more about thunks, they sound pretty esoteric. You can look it up on reduxjs.org, what exactly a thunk is. It's kind of hard to explain, so I'll let you guys do some extra research. But basically, this is going to be a way so that we can call our API request via a dispatch that we have from our reducer. So next, we're going to go into our extra reducers, and we're going to add some cases to this builder that is passed in. So we're going to do builder.add case. These cases correspond to different, different points in the async functions cycle. So different states, pretty much. So if it's pending, if our request is pending, then this function will execute. And inside of here, we'll just set the state loading equal to true. So you can see in here, we're passing in state, which we defined up here as data state. And we're just going to set the state loading property to true. Now remember, if this were a normal reducer, we couldn't set this property directly like that because we'd be mutating the global state. But because we have this create slice function provided to us by reduxjs.toolkit, we can actually mutate the state, and Immer will do some internal work and make sure that our function remains pure. So we're going to add another case, and in this time we'll say if it is fulfilled, we will execute this function, passing state of data state, and action will be payload action array data instance. And in here, we're going to have some logic. So we're going to say the state.loading is now false, right? So if we fulfilled this promise, we can set the loading to false because our data has been loaded. And we'll just set the state.data equals action.payload. So when this fetch data async resolves, it's going to return to us an action object with this payload property that will be containing this response data, which was basically whatever we resolved from here. So you can see how that data kind of gets transferred. And let's do one more add case this case will be if the function fails. So if this is rejected, they'll say state.loading is false. So if this were an actual like fetch API request, this would be useful, but because our function is always going to resolve, this is kind of pointless, but it's going to be useful if you have an actual fetch API. Okay, now we're going to export default data slice.reducer. So when we create this slice is going to have a reducer property rather that we can integrate into our store. So next, let's go into store.ts, and we're going to set up our Redux store. So configure store. Configure store, that's all we need. Export const store equals configure store. And inside of configure store, we're going to add a reducer property. And inside of the reducer property, we're going to add an object with a data property that is data reducer. Let's import data reducer from features data slice. So this data reducer right here that we just imported, this corresponds to this default export right here. So yeah. Okay, now we're going to export a few types so that we can apply these to our Redux hooks. So export that app dispatch. Oops, need to add type of. And then export type, a root state type. Set that equal to return type of store.getStore. Okay, sorry, get state. Okay. Yeah, so basically we just defined our Redux store. So if you're unfamiliar with what the Redux store is, basically when we call a dispatch function to our store, it'll really be accessing this reducer, and when the reducer is called, it's going to update our store. So Redux has this really intricate model, which you can learn more about on their website, or reduxjs.org. But basically, when we call this reducer, it's going to update the store for us. So, and the store is kind of like the global state of truth. So we also exported these types. These types are going to be used for our hooks that we'll be using in our React components. And we are going to define those now. So inside of hooks TS, we're going to import typed selector, type use selector hook, use dispatch, and use selector. And we're also going to import those TypeScript types of root state and app dispatch from store. Then we're going to export our hooks. Use app dispatch equals. Okay, use dispatch. This one's pretty straightforward. All we need to do is add our type like this, like so, like a normal React hook. Then we can add our use app selector. This one's a little bit different. We have to do typed use selector hook and pass in our root state. and set that equal to use selector. So basically by doing this, we're ensuring that our hooks that we'll use in our React components are type safe. They have React's type system on them. So now that we're done with that, we're just going to go into, our data displayer. We're going to define this React component. Okay. So we're using those type safe hooks we just created once again. And we will set our data equal to use app selector rather. And inside of here, this takes a function, and we're going to be accessing the state.data property. So inside of the store, we already have the data right here. This would be like the first call to .data. And then inside of our data slice, we also have this data attribute. So we're accessing basically that data attribute. Okay, we're gonna add some state to our React component. This will just be a Boolean value of data present. So we'll just say use state Boolean false. Okay, we'll set that to false as default. Obviously need to import use state. Import use state from React. Need to fix that. Okay, so this will start off as false, and then once we load our data in, we'll just set that to true, so we don't constantly reload our data. Inside of here, we have our function. If the data is not present, we're going to dispatch our fetch data async, and we're going to set data present to true. And we'll have this effect run once when the component mounts. Okay, so basically we initialized all this stuff, and inside of here, inside this use effect hook, when our component renders, we're going to check if the data is present. If the data is not present, we're going to dispatch, which was provided here, to fetch our data async, and then we're going to set data present to true so that we don't continue to requery. Okay, now we're going to define our data. So that'll be equal to data.map, so we'll map over the data. Inside of this map, we're going to get data instance. So these data instance refer to each of these objects. So for each of these, there's two important pieces of information that we need to do. So we need to have some inside elements. These will be equal to d.data.map. For each of these, this is a instance of our data. And inside of here, actually, let's remove this. We're going to just add a p component, and we'll just say i.header and i.length. Let's import those types as well. Okay, so our data instance we just saw, but our instance data is a little bit different. Our instance data would be each one of these objects. So these objects in the data field. So for each of these, we're going to be creating a paragraph element, and we're just going to list the header and the length. Okay, now from this, we're going to return a React fragment with an h1, and inside this h1, we'll just say d.header. And then we're going to have these inside elements listed. Okay, cool. And then once we're done with this, we're going to return div. And inside of this div, we're just going to have our rendered data. Okay, we're missing some sort of syntax right here. What is there it is. Okay, we're missing something. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, we needed one more parenthesis right there. Okay, so now that we're done with that, we should be good to set up everything. Inside of app, though, we're going to want to set up our actual components. So we'll say const app equals, and then we're just going to return our data displayer, which we actually didn't export. So let's export default data displayer, import that, and then we'll export default app. And let's npm start and see our result. So it should take, oh, looks like we did actually miss something up. Symbol, can't resolve. Okay, we accidentally imported that, so we should be good. Should take 5 seconds, and then our data will render in, and boom, there we go. So this was just creating a basic kind of API with TypeScript, Redux, and React. I hope you guys learned something. Feel free to use this same kind of structure to your application. I had a really tough time finding information on how to build something like this. So I hope that what I showed you guys was helpful. And if you guys want any other video suggestions, just let me know. Thank you.